Luce learns from experience. She makes choices based on what she sees and what she learns. She does not cling to preconceived prejudices and notions about what the world is like. She begins with many dearly held notions of what she believes the Boiling Isles to be and who she believes herself to be. And over the course of the series, she learns that a lot of those assumptions are oversimplistic, and she proves herself willing to learn these things and to learn them with the help of others. She tests all of her beliefs in experience. She holds them up to the light of empiricism, the light of her actual being in the world, and sees whether they're justified or not. That is what makes Luce so special to me. And this is ultimately why I found myself liking her more and more over the course of the series. It's not necessarily that I ever disliked her. I had no vendetta against her. But nonetheless, she proved herself willing to express humility. By humility, I do not mean self-abnegation. I do not mean always feeling guilty. That is as much a problem as too much confidence. I mean the simple willingness to accept that all ideas build off old ideas, that the current state of things is not permanent, it's not absolute, and it's not sacred. Rather, it is a world of experimentation, of evolution, of specific traits and characteristics facing an unpredictable and unforeseen outside world, and either fitting that world or being out of place in that world. And if they're out of place, she ends up revising and rethinking her ideas, and she does that with the help of other people. She does it with the help of this vast community of other outcasts who are willing to negotiate this unpredictable world with her. They do not leave her to merely plan out for herself, in this hyper-individualist sense, what she needs to do. People like Ida and King and Lilith and the like accept that ultimately her decisions are hers to make and no one can make them for her. Even her biological mom, Camilla, very much understands this. But they also understand that if the world is not to cohere to preconceived expectations, if knowledge is not to be conceived of as something static and fixed, but rather constantly being made by people's insights and impressions and experiences based on their interactions with a rapidly changing and fundamentally amorphous world, then one cannot just rely on precepts. One cannot just rely on abstractions. One needs to rely on other people. It's not just a good thing to do. It's not just morally correct. It is necessary to understand the world in all its permutations and shifts, and to understand one's interactions with the world, one's being in the world. Understand that ourselves are constantly linked to the world. We can't just cut ourselves off from the world. We're a part of it. And as the world changes, as it inevitably does, we do too, and we should not fear that change, but rather accept it. As Luce does, she does not hold on to these narrow conceptions of who she is that she has at the start of the show. Now, obviously, her inability to fit in at the start of the show is not her fault, necessarily. She does do a lot of things that are a bit antisocial, let's say. Like, again, I always go back to the setting snakes on everyone. That's not malintentioned, but it's a bit more than just mere outcast behavior. But a lot of her other behavior is relatively harmless, if a bit strange. It takes her a while to really go between the abstractions of the moral dictates forced upon her and her own personal desires and whims. She needs to negotiate between those two extremes. Luce is, of course, significant in a lot of ways. She is, as a bisexual Latina teenager, a rather groundbreaking protagonist for Disney. She has her very sweet relationship with Amity, and importantly, it's a relationship that the show devotes a lot of time to, even if Dana Terrace, as she said, never intended the show to be so romance-focused. But I also don't want to focus on too much of Luce as a mere individual when discussing her character, because one thing the show emphasizes is the importance of community. Now, there are some notions of community that can be quite binding and restrictive. There are many examples of parental dynamics that are rather repressive and cruel. The foremost example of the unhealthy family is Belos, both in his relationship with his brother, Caleb, and in his rather strange relationship with his brother's clones, of which Hunter is one of them. But there's also Amity's parents. Her father seems more or less fine. Her mom is a complete monster. I do not believe there is a single notable example in the show of the idyllic, quote-unquote, normal family. Meaning your nuclear family with two opposite-sex parents and kids and a close, untroubled relationship between them. We have Luce, whose father is not in the picture because he died, tragically. We have Willow, who has two dads. We have little dynamics like that. Now, I'm not saying the show is entirely against the nuclear family. What I am saying is that the show is very invested in exploring these unforeseen conceptions of community, these connections and relations outside the boundaries of the so-called ordinary or expected world. Not just for their own sake, although that's important too, but also to cultivate the sense of knowing, the sense of understanding. I think a lot about the American pragmatist philosopher John Dewey in response to Luce, who is ardently against this dogmatic conception of education that's simply a filling up, that's simply a hierarchical procession of information, of facts. The problem for Dewey with this kind of education, with this kind of learning, is that it is removed from the world of experience. It is empty. You learn, say, what's the highest mountain in Africa or Asia, but those are just little pieces of information. They're little quantifiable bits of data. They do not have any relevance to the actual project of the individual's education. Education for Dewey is necessarily a relational process, and one that needs to involve the student intimately. The student needs to be practically related to what they are learning. That does not mean learning should be devoted to merely the practical realm as it is narrowly considered, i.e. the realm of money, productivity, and consumption, but rather that learning should be tangible. It should have this material, palpable element to it. The aspect of Dewey's educational philosophy that people always take on is the so-called learning by doing, which Dewey did not invent, but was in fact a fan of, where students in a classroom have to learn for themselves, of course with the guidance of a teacher, how what they are learning matters, the relevance of it to them. They conduct their own experiments and reach their own kinds of conclusions. Knowledge is not, in this case, merely some sacred tome that is passed down through the generations, but the act of discovery, the act of being a part of what is being learned, of seeing how it is relevant to one's life, not in the narrow utilitarian sense, but in the sense of it saturating the world one experiences, saturating how we actually see our experiences and our concepts of ourselves and those around us. Yes, merely looking at pieces of information that are disconnected from everyday life might be easier, but it ultimately is a more rigid form of education and study. The education remains apart from our perspective of the world. It remains just some laws and dictates and some bits of information. It does not relate to the actual expansion and nourishing of our consciousness. Luce ultimately does grow up, but she does not grow up simply by fitting this conformist set of rules, as the rather hilarious think inside the box camp would indicate. What actually happens is quite the opposite. Luce needs to interact with other people and test for herself whether they are deserving of her understanding and her sympathy, and if they are, what she can do to help them and guide them from a place of unease and a place of discomfort to a place of unity and community, to build that network of understanding of people passing down and passing around their own experiences that promote such a wide and nourishing environment for Luce to learn and grow. Think of how she interacts with Hunter, or how she interacts with Amity. These are extremely close relationships for her in the long term, but they do not start out that way. They become close relationships because she is willing to look at them without prejudice, without relying on reductive and insular notions. She analyzes for herself, intently but curiously, who these people are, what motivates them, what do they really want. If they are acting in an antisocial or counterproductive way, why? And what can she do to help them? Now, this approach has dangers. Sometimes there are benefits to preconceived wisdom. If someone had just told her, oh hey, Balos is bad, and this Philip Whittabane guy is Balos, so don't trust him at all, she would have been spared the humiliation of helping Philip. But ultimately, the Owl House suggests that such risks are worth the benefits of such an open, broad approach to interacting with others and learning about them, and thus learning about oneself. Even her terrible experience with Balos teaches her lessons that, while not pleasant, are her own. She can have that wisdom as part of herself, as part of her organic personality, instead of merely abstract dictates. So anyway, thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can, and you want to see more videos like this before anyone else. I love Luce. She's really grown on me. Great character. Anyway, tune in soon for our next analysis. We'll be coming soon. Promise you that. Thank you all again. Adios, comrades.